Hey, what's going on everybody? We have the meta snapshot for patch 13.3. This is the week 2 update, and we've been preparing for the tournament next week. So both me and Voidson will be playing that on Saturday, 4 p.m. EST. But let's get into the comps. So honestly, there's only one change this week. It's pretty big though. So instead of going over a lot of the other comps, we are going to be focusing mainly on the S tiers this week. So we'll do a full rundown of this and then a brief overview of everything else. I normally don't go in that deep a detail, but because this patch is so warped around one comp, it is going to change pretty much everything that you are going to do. So best comp right now is Samira. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's even better than the Freelo Sin comp that we thought was the best at the beginning of the week. But these two are probably the two kings right now. Lasercorps, definitely playable. Kaisa Recon, if you're uncontested Recon, yes, you're going to do well. But you have to be that one guy. So if there are two people doing it, like one of those players is going to have to get out. It could be you, it could be the other person. Up to you if you want to chance that. Force Viego, it's like playable in some spots. Bel'Veth, playable in some spots too. Anima Misfortune, playable in some spots. And then Yuumi, same thing here. So we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 situationals. One like kind of okay comp, and then one augment dependent, and then like the Samira comp. So it's pretty much just playing Samira this week. But again, we're going to go over in detail how to do and approach every single one of these comps, starting from the beginning of the game. So in the A tier, we have Jax. Honestly, it is playable. You just need an even better spot than like having the Yummi Reroll comp, for example. You need to like start the game with bows somehow when everyone's going for bow. And then after that, you need to get an amazing Brawler start. But if you do get that in play, like Jax is actually not bad. Renekton reroll, you need to get Reign of Anger augment. Soraka, if you're forced to play AP, Soraka, Zoe, Leblanc, the Taliyah builds, those are going to be like your only options. Pretty much if you're going for Viego or Misfortune, because those also share a lot of the same items, and then for some reason you hit these guys for free, yeah, definitely go into it. Or if you get a really good admin for Leblanc. It's not exactly an ideal spot to be in, but it definitely is playable in the right situations. 4 ace mech is just high rolling. It's like in poker, if you get 4 aces, you're going to do well. Same thing in TFT. Super Draven, this is very similar to the Yuumi build. It's very oppressive if you actually get it set up. So this is actually like probably one of the more playable comps in the A tier right now. Vi Ezreal reroll, this comp revolves a lot around just getting the Vi carry augment or the Ezreal carry augment. Both are very deadly. Not as oppressive as like the Lee Sin augment, but definitely like a force to be reckoned with here. Talon reroll, same thing. Duelists, you need like Locket starts with 4 Duelists. If not, I wouldn't bother really playing it. MF Mech is just like the low roll version of 4 Ace Mech. Camille reroll, definitely an option if you get a good admin and a lot of Camille's early. Sureshot reroll, just play regular Sureshots, guys. So like you could play this, it's up to you. It's a free country, but I'd rather just play regular Samira. Anima Jinx reroll is decent, but you do need the augment for it. I personally hate it, but other people swear by it. Gangplank super is actually like, that's actually A+. I forgot to move it there. Flaming Ricochet is another one of those like super broken reroll comps. It's like just as powerful as the Renekton, better than the Talon, things like that. Onto the B tier, Ashe, don't really want to play it. Lulu, if you get a good start for it, definitely go for it. Kayle, same thing. Nasus reroll, it's one of the worst augments right now, the Nasus carry augment, but if you manage to get a lot of Nasuses early, it is worth playing. Wukong reroll, I actually played this in the tournament, so definitely check that game out if you have not already. Even though it's like the second worst augment and it's really low, it's like the lowest comp that I have listed out right now, there are situations where you do want to play it. Same with Duelist reroll with Yasuo. So even though something's in the B tier, maybe like 1 out of 50 games, 1 out of 30 games, it's still playable. So always keep that in mind whenever you guys are looking at this tier list, or any tier list for that matter. It doesn't have to be mine. But for the sub rankings, if you want to know what's like S+, S-, A+, A-, B+, B-, or just regular SAB, check out the OnlyFans. It'll have that as like one of the pay for features. So on to the comps. So we're going to take a while on Samira. So get a drink of water. We're going to try to do like maybe in a couple minutes a Samira TLDR or something like that. More in depth than what we normally do though. So you want to get a bow start. The issue is everyone wants a bow start because everyone wants to play this comp. So what can you get instead? Well, you could get either a sword, because it builds Gunblade or Infinity Edge, or you go for a glove. Alternatively, you could also go for a tank item, belt, or chain. That's going to be kind of your bread and butter because you could just build tank items and then hope you get Last Whisper components. The only required item is going to be Last Whisper. So because Last Whisper is the only required item, you could go for a glove and build into it even without the bow, because sometimes you just natural the bow, or the people who already got the bow from earlier, they let you have it on the carousel because they're trying to finish their Gunblade, they're trying to finish like the other component, they might be going for a glove, or they're trying to finish a tank item. By the way, on this new team builder, I will add in like the hero augments over here. I'll probably do that next week. But you may have noticed something weird already about this build. I wouldn't really even call it a Samira comp anymore. You just play Sureshots, and you don't need 4 Sureshots. Like 4 Sureshots is very good, but there are multiple boards of this. Like you could run 2 Sureshots, you could even run 0 Sureshot with Aphelios. If you get like a lot of Urgots and Fiddlesticks, like just replace all the Sureshots and just throw them in over the other people. Like Aphelios is fine on his own, he doesn't need the Sureshot trait. Obviously he could use it, but he doesn't need it as much as say like a Samira. After that, you want to focus on your tanks. Tanks are the most important thing about this comp. So the reason why is because they buy time for the buff to kind of stack up, because oftentimes you don't have that Aphelios, you don't have that 2-star Fiddlesticks, you don't have that 2-star Urgot. If you guys had those champions 2-starred every single game, you wouldn't need to read any guide because you'd be the best player in the world. But that doesn't always happen, so that's why you need to look at some of the comps that build into it, which is what we have here. So in the early game, you want to play around your AD item holders. We have a list of those down here. So Ashe and Kayle are going to be the go-tos before you hit Sivir. And then once you get the Sureshot buff active, Sivir is going to be your main item holder. Once you get Senna to 2-star, then it's going to transfer over onto Senna. And then after that, you go for Samira 2-star. Do not sell the Senna until you do get the Samira 2-star, because oftentimes Samira 1 is often not that great. However, there is one exception to these 1-star units. Aphelios 1, I would say, is better than Senna 2. It is worse than Samira 2, but it's definitely better than Senna 2 and Samira 1. So if you ever randomly get an Aphelios early on, just sell your item holder and put all the items on him. It's perfectly fine to do that. However, if you have like a Samira pair, I suggest rolling first, hitting the Samira, and then putting the items on her. Or if you don't hit, then put the items on the Aphelios or leave it on the Senna. So it's a little different if you have a pair of Samiras, but pretty much whenever I get an Aphelios 1, I just sell my other guy and put the items on him. After that, you put leftover items on the Samira. You don't actually want to put a Thieves Glove on her. The Thieves Gloves just represents like random items that you get. Let's get into some of the other parts of this comp. So the comp really comes online at level 8, as it says here on bunnymuffins.lol/meta. And I highly recommend, if you do not have any economy augments, to wait till 4-5 to roll. The reason why is because if you level up fast state on 4-2, oftentimes you don't have enough gold to kind of guarantee hitting the board. If you roll on level 7 at 4-1, you could hit everything. That does happen for some people, but it's not like the mathematically correct play. Again, this is without any economy augments or any like crazy win streaking or anything like that. I would wait again until 4-5. The reason why is because you could hit a lot of other units. So we mentioned before the board here is very flexible. We mentioned some of those units here. Zac, Sejuani, and Echo are all really good units. So Vi in the early game is one of the great early game tanks for this comp because 1, you could play her from underground, and 2, she gives you a great transition into the mid game because you can play stuff like Sejuani, she works with Aegis, with Alistar, and if she's 2-star, she's often better than like a 1-star 4-cost, or at least she's a little tankier than them. Coincidentally, she also works with Echo, so if you hit Echo, she also gives even more Aegis if you get that. And then you could also use the other threat units. It doesn't have to be Zac. Zac is obviously the best tank, but if you hit like a Rammus 2 or a Cho'Gath 2 on these roll downs, sometimes you're forced to roll in 7 and it's easier to hit him there. Definitely throw those in. You don't have to go for exactly like this comp. In fact, oftentimes I find myself dropping Galio later on if the weather's not good. What is good weather? Okay, the good weather is most likely only going to be windy because it pretty much is the same exact thing as Sureshot trait. The shielding weather can be good, but it makes your positioning a little bit weird, so only do it if you actually have a good reason to do so, such as the enemy team doesn't have that much AoE against you, or if you just happen to have like a free Janet 2 for some random reason. The mana one's not that great either, so I typically don't play that one. But again, if I get a free Janna 2, why not? So if you're not playing the civilian version, I would drop Galio and Janna for those tanks that we mentioned before. And of course, you could throw in the random threat legendaries as always. You could do that in every single comp in this patch. Another option for frontline that we could go into later is going to be the Mech. So it's not shown here, but like you could go for the set build with Sureshots, and that does perfectly fine too. So even though I'm aiming for this board with Zac as the main tank, I listed out like 3 other characters that you could go for. One of them is Set, one of them's Sejuani, and one of them's Echo. And any of those 4-cost tanks, you could just play them naked without synergies as well, like temporarily at least, and that's going to be very important for your team. You could only put on your board what you hit, so that's always something that's very important in TFT. This comp definitely does reward those flexible players, even though you're kind of just building your comp around 1 or 2 units, namely the Aphelios and the Samira. Another thing is that this comp caps out really hard in the late game because the legendary actually does something. So most other comps, they just throw in the threat legendaries. They don't really throw in like a trait legendary. For example, Syndra, yeah, she's great, but she's not going to win your Star Guardian game single-handedly. Aphelios will. Same story with Nunu. He's not going to make your Gadgetines magically win. Like, yeah, he definitely helps, but he's not that thing you just pull out of your pocket and it just like wins the game. Like, Aphelios is pretty much like a trump card. So again, like transitioning is going to be the most important part of this comp. Always just like, I would recommend just practicing this a couple times. Maybe you lose a couple of games at first, but I promise you in the long run, this is definitely going to pay off. We go through a lot in detail over here of what to do, so I'll let you guys peruse that in your own time, but we kind of went over most of it already. For items, Last Whisper is most important. You do not play this comp without Last Whisper. Hextech Gunblade is the next option. Hextech Gunblade is the next priority. Just any type of healing is good, but this one definitely helps out the most because it heals up your front line. But sometimes you're forced to build like a Hand of Justice or like even Bloodthirster. Like Bloodthirster is probably the worst healing item out of the 3, but some games you gotta do what you gotta do. For the last damage item, Infinity Edge is gonna be great because it allows their spells to crit. And then damage multipliers such as Giant Slayer, flat AD such as Deathblade. You could drop some Sureshots if you do have the Deathblade. Rageblade, sometimes you get too many rods because let's say you start off the game with Last Whisper and a sword. So you have bow, glove, and sword, and that's like the perfect start for this comp. On that carousel on stage 2, you take the Gunblade, so you get a rod, and then all of a sudden you get dropped like 1 or 2 more rods, so sometimes you do have to end up building that Rageblade. Another use for the rods is building Fiddlesticks items, but I wouldn't count on getting a Fiddlesticks in most of your games. Runons is going to be the last item that I recommend for like those like really beefy, powerful items. Of course, you could play other stuff on her, but these are the ones we recommend the most. Frontline / bruiser items, these are going to go on Zac, Sejuani, and Echo. So there's a bit of a weird situation going on. So if you ever get like a ZZ Rod, I would put that on your Alistar because you don't really care about items on him. But as your main tank, it has to be one of the 4-cost tanks that we talked about. I guess one of them that's missing here is also the Set, because sometimes you can go defenders if a lot of other players are also going Samira. Aphelios works like kind of the same, but also a little bit different. Deathblade, Infinity Edge, Rageblade, Runons, it's like pretty much the same thing, but in a slightly different order. So the reason why Deathblade's listed out first is because like sometimes when you play him, you don't even need Sureshots at all. I believe I mentioned this at the start. So you just get it from the Deathblade instead, and he just blows people up before you even need the Sureshot buff to stack. So that's why sometimes people don't play Aphelios with Sureshot. They'd play it in like a super capped late game board. But since you build these items for your Samira early on, you end up just selling your Samira, swapping the items over onto the Aphelios, and that's why you see it as like one of the more popular builds here. After that, like just like damage, raw damage is going to be good for him, and that's pretty much all you have to do. In terms of like questions on which gun to use, pretty much never use the stun gun. So if Aphelios is your primary carry, use the left gun. That's the blue gun. If Aphelios is your secondary carry, for example, you have like a fully itemized Samira, you can't sell her quite yet, and then you have like leftover items on your Aphelios, use the red gun in those cases. That's kind of the rule of thumb I've been doing, and that's kind of what I've observed other people doing as well. We'll update more of the augments section later because I think we just mentioned the hero augments here. But for the regular augments, anything that gives defensive stats is going to be really good. For example, makeshift armor is really good in this team comp because you could just drop down to 2 Sureshots, just focus on Samira plus someone else, ideally an Aphelios, and then have all offensive items in your backline, and then all your front lines will just benefit a lot from the makeshift armor. Another thing you could do is like Second Wind, bony frontline. Pretty much anything that makes your team tankier is going to work out really well because you just need to buy time for the back line. There are a lot of other augments that are really good, such as like Jeweled Lotus, but again, we'll update that once like this feature gets like fixed or whatever. So that's pretty much like the gist of how to play the Samira comp, as well as how to navigate the early game as well. Let's get into the next build. So Freelo Sin Hearts. So not too much to say here. You just want 2 Lee Sins. Do not play this comp with only 1 Lee Sin. So if you ever do get the Cleansing Safeguard augment, that's the carry Lee Sin augment, he is going to just give you free LP. He's essentially like an LP printer. There's a bug right now where if you have 2 Lee Sins out at the same time and they shield each other, they can still gain mana while shielded. Normally, the way Lee Sin works is that once his shield is active, he no longer gains mana until the shield is gone. After that, he could start gaining mana again. However, when they shield each other, they keep getting mana, and then they just shield each other again, and it just goes stacks on stacks on stacks. And then because he's a heart unit, he gives a lot of AP to your entire team. So sometimes my Sona just ends up having like 500 AP, even though she has no AP items. It's not just Sona that gets that, it's your entire team that gets that. So that's why this comp is so good. It's not good because the augment's good, it's good because the augment's bugged. Another thing you need to do with this comp is prioritize tank items. So just slam as many tank items as you can, just throw them all on your Lee Sins. Do not focus on the backline items. Another thing that's important with this comp is the rolling pattern. So you want to roll at level 6 on 3-2 until you get at least 4 copies of Lee Sin. This would give you 1 Lee Sin 2-star and an extra Lee Sin. However, if you are in a position where you could spare gold, get 2 Lee Sin 2s. After that, you do not need any more. Getting a Lee Sin 3 is actually making your team a little weaker because they don't do that bug interaction as I talked about. Of course, like if you get it for free, like it's obviously still good, but you don't need to spend that gold investing into that type of team. Instead, you could use that gold to invest in leveling up and then playing a bunch of legendary units. Remember how we said that Lee Sin gives your team like 400 or 500 AP in a lot of fights? Imagine an Urgot with 500 AP. He's going to get you a lot of items and gold, which helps you get stronger in the late game. So you definitely want to drop in an Urgot in this comp later on, and that's why you prioritize leveling up after you get 2 Lee Sin 2s. We have a long list of items down here of stuff he can use, and a lot of them are a little weird. For example, Quicksilver is actually really good on him because it allows him to just keep casting without being interrupted. I actually think it's one of his best items, but you can't always get that many of them. I guess I should correct myself on that. It's the best item if the other 2 items are good, because it kind of enables him just to get a really good start early on. Any generic tank item or utility item is going to work on him, so like Ionic Spark, that's more of a utility item. Sunfire Cape, same thing, but like the pure tank items such as Declaw, Warmogs, Bramble, those are all going to be really good. Redemption's kind of in between, and Vow's kind of like a pure tank item as well. Pretty much just get as many of these as you can and put them on both your Lee Sins. You do not care about the backline items because Sona's going to have 400 AP if the 2 Lee Sins live for a long time. Think about it this way. At 400 AP, you pretty much have like 3 hats on your Sona, so as long as you itemize the Lees, the guys in the backline will pretty much have 3 items anyways. But yeah, that's pretty much all you need to know about this comp. Also, like First Aid Kit, really good with the build, obviously, because they just get more shielding. Any type of healing, such as Second Wind, is really good too, because they heal them up while they're shielded, and then they essentially just literally never die. But yeah, that's pretty much all you need to know about that comp. Let's move on into Lasercorps Zed. So Lasercorps Zed, there's a steep drop-off in the power between the Cleansing Safeguard comp and the Samira comp, but this one is still viable. Zed is actually the counter to Sureshots, believe it or not, but even then, the Sureshots are just too good and this comp isn't enough to counter it. The reason why it counters it is because Sureshots run a lot of tanks, and Zed has a way to bypass all the tanks. As long as your Zed has any bit of good damage items, he can kill the Samira through the Hextech Gunblade. Aphelios can be a little tricky because he has Ox Force, so in the late game, Aphelios does outscale this. It's also like a 50-50 because sometimes you hit the Samira, sometimes you don't. It's actually more like a 25% chance to hit the Samira because 1, you have to guess the right side, left side, or right side, and then 2nd, if he places a unit next to a Samira, sometimes you attack the other one and then dash away. So I guess it's like a 25% chance to beat the comp. Maybe that's not that great of a counter now that I think about it. But theoretically, like he should shred like the other guy he targets and then go on to the Samira, and then hopefully you win the fight that way. Of course, if you ever get to 9 Lasercorps, that's another way to win the fight because this comp does cap out really hard at that point. It's just really hard to get there. It's much easier to get a copy of Aphelios than it is to get 9 Lasercorps. The reason why Lasercorps comp is good right now is because they changed the way it scales, so it's 3579 instead of 369, and they did lower the power of it a little bit because it's easier to get, but it's a much smoother power curve, so you can just like slowly add in things to your team, and you don't really have to worry too much about like spiking from 3 to 6 Lasercorps. There aren't too many details of this team comp. Obviously, you only want to try to actually go for this if you have the Lasercorps spatula, which is kind of just luck of the draw. Sometimes you get it at 2-1, sometimes you get it at 3-2, but some games you don't even get it at all. So the games you don't get it at all, you're trying to get like a 5th or a 6th, and the games that you do get it, you're trying to get like a 4th or a 3rd. The times that you get 2 of them, that's when you go for the 1st or 2nd. Obviously, you can still get 1st or 2nd without 9 Lasercorps, but it's definitely a lot easier to do so. We have other items listed out for each of the champions down here, so feel free to check that out in your free time. Next build up we have is Kaisa Recon. This is just a tried and true comp. You need a lot of bows though, so not that many, I guess just like 2 of them. But there is one more thing you can do with this build, which is not really mentioned that much here. So if you ever do get the spread shot Vayne augment, that's the 3-cost Vayne carry augment, you could play the same exact build that you see here, except use Vayne as your primary carry. I've even seen people use Rising Spell Force with Ezreal to great effect with the 4 Recon build. So it doesn't always have to be Kaisa carry. Recons in general are just pretty strong right now. You just have to hit them, and to hit them, you need to be uncontested. So unlike most other comps where they kind of have like a primary and secondary carry, you really only care about your primary carry. So if you're playing Kaisa carry, only itemize Kaisa, screw everyone else. If you're playing Vayne carry, only itemize Vayne, screw everyone else. Same thing with Ezreal. The only other ones you want to focus on are your tanks. Rammus and Cho'Gath are going to be the main guys there. Normally you do Rammus as your main tank, but it definitely does depend on your game. If there's a lot of AP, obviously go for Cho'Gath. If there's a lot of AD, obviously go for Rammus. I normally just default to Rammus though. One other tip about this build is don't get baited into going for Nyla 3, because oftentimes you don't have enough time to itemize her. You really want to focus just on the Rammus and the Cho'Gath and whoever your primary carry is. The early game is mainly going to be econ openers, so you definitely need like a big economy or like 1 econ augment to kind of play this build. So if you get full gold drops on stage 1, definitely a sign to go for this build. If you get like consistency or like trade sector, pretty much like any econ augment on 2-1, that's kind of another sign to play this comp. Of course, if you get the recon augments, that works as well. But yeah, Triforce is another augment that you can kind of just like turbo force the comp with. Double Trouble, same thing. Jeweled Lotus, it's pretty much like a soft recon augment because it allows you to drop Ashe. And then pretty much anything that makes you tankier, such as Second Wind or Phony Frontline, is really good because you just need a lot of tanks with this build. That's pretty much all there is to it. You want to get to level 7, slow roll to get Kaisa 3, Rammus 3, and Cho'Gath 3. Sometimes you go for the Vayne 3, but you don't have to if you don't have items for her. And you pretty much just stay level 7 all game until you hit them all 3-star. Obviously, if you're on your last breath, level up to 8 and put a random unit in. That's going to be one of the random threat units, such as like Zac, Fiddlesticks, Urgot. And sometimes you could even put in an Echo to get to 3 Star Guardian with Nyla, Kaisa, and Echo. But that's pretty much all you need to know about this comp. I have like pretty long videos on it if you want to check that out here. Actually, let's talk about videos for a bit because a lot of people ask me this. They're like, hey, I am rank whatever, and I'm trying to get to the next rank. So I have a bunch of guides listed out at the top of the meta snapshot here, and it's in order of like beginner to advanced. So if you're completely new, check out this video. If you are a beginner, check out the 101 tips. If you are intermediate to advanced, check out the 5 playstyles for climbing. And then if you are trying to push like the very top ranks, go into the last video over here. But yeah, that's pretty important stuff just for general non-comp specific ways to get better at the game. But let's go into the Force Viego build. This build is really hit or miss. Remember how we said Lasercorps comp revolves a lot around Spatula? Well, so does the Force Viego comp. Luckily, you could run either the Force emblem or the Renegade emblem. Both of them are good. I like the Force emblem a little more because I feel like the legendary units or like the random 4-cost use it a little bit better. And it doesn't revolve around needing to hit the Leona, because Leona is pretty hard to hit, you don't always get her. But the Force one is much easier to splash in and out. The main items on Viego is just going to be the Ionic Spark plus the Hextech Gunblade. And then the third item doesn't really matter. It could be a hat, it could be a Titan's Resolve, it could be a Jeweled Gauntlet, lots of different options you could use there. After that, you want to focus on either your secondary carry, which is whoever's holding an Force spatula, or just like a random legendary such as Fiddlesticks or Urgot. And then after that, you want to focus on utility items. So utility items are going to be either the Sunfire Cape or the Redemption, or stuff like Shroud. That's pretty much all you need. I wouldn't build things like ZZ-Rot Portal because you have so many melees in the front, so ZZ-Rot doesn't really do that much. So just keep that in mind whenever you're playing this build. This build, you want to do a Rod start, most likely, but I wouldn't start Rod to force this comp because you really just want to play the Samira comp. But if you're forced to get the Rod because you missed out on Bow, this is definitely an option. And let's get into the next option that could also use the Rod, which is the Anima Squad comp. So Rod's really good in this build because it works really well on MF, it builds the Ionic Spark, they pretty much just all share the same items. Overall, Anima Squad's like a decently solid comp, but it's kind of in the same spot as the Oxforce build. It's like, they're just better things to go for. Like, there are going to be 3 Samira players every game, and if you ever get contested in Anima, and sometimes that's going to happen because some people just like playing the Anima Squad comp, some people just like playing the Oxforce comp for some reason, and if you get contested, they can feel really, really bad, or sometimes you're uncontested and you still don't hit. That also feels pretty bad. Coincidentally, both these comps get really powered up by getting any of their spatulas, so that's definitely a big help as well. But yeah, for this build, you focus more on MF. Sometimes you could use Vayne, same thing with the Spread Shot Vayne from Recon. If you do get Spread Shot, you could do a carry Vayne build, something like a Spear of Shojin. Gunblade plus third item is going to work pretty well. Main tank's going to be Riven, so oftentimes Riven's going to be 2-star, in which case you want to full tank the Echo or like your Fiddlesticks or whoever. But sometimes you do get the 3-star Riven. In those games, she's going to be your primary tank, obviously, and she is just going to mow through every single team. So here's the thing about itemizing Riven. So Riven is going to want a Warmogs if she is 2-star, but if she's 3-star, you want like a non-health tank item because being 3-star already gives you a lot of health, so you don't need any more. Obviously, you can't predict this in the beginning, but if you do have the choice, like let's say you are going into stage 4-7, you're killing the dragon or whatever, and then you already have Bramble and Dragonclaw on her, and then you have a 3-star Riven. What do you get? Not the Warmogs, you'd get something else. I believe we have like a list of items down here. No, we just have generic tank line. But you could get something like a Redemption, you could get something like a Titan's Resolve, you could get something like a Sunfire Cape. There are a couple other options that I'm missing here, but pretty much like you don't need the flat health from the Warmogs. But if you are 2-star with these items, then you definitely want to go for the Warmogs. Riven can also hold your Ionic Spark. It doesn't have to be on Fiddle. Obviously, in a very perfect world, you hit Fiddle in the first place, and then you have the opportunity to give him the Ionic Spark. But sometimes you don't even hit him, so if you don't hit him, just put the Ionic on Riven or Echo. If you don't get the Ionic Spark at all and you need Magic Resist penetration, you could go for a Static Shiv, and then I typically put that on either my Jinx or my Vayne. I think Jinx might be a slightly better item holder because she's a bit more durable because of Prankster, but Vayne also just like does a little bit more, so she makes better use of the item. So there's like give and takes to everything in TFT, and putting the Shiv on Vayne or Jinx is definitely one of those like give and takes. For items on MF, it's just Spear of Shojin plus 2 damage items. Doesn't really matter what damage items. Like anything with AP works, so we have that listed out down here. You could even go like double Shojin. You could also go the Gunblade as everyone's building, so if you build a Gunblade early, you could still pivot into the comp. I do prefer full damage MF, but honestly, it doesn't really matter. Just get 3 items on her, Shojin plus any 2 that you can get your hands on. But yeah, that's pretty much like the gist of this build here. Like anything with mana regen is really good for augments, like Uplink's good, Aximark's really good. Obviously, the like Anima Squad augments are good too. Like I feel like I don't need to mention that for most of these comps. Like obviously, if you get a specific trait augment for whatever trait you're playing, you pretty much always take it like 99% of the time. If it wasn't the case, the comp would just be so bad. But let's move on into the comp that we skipped. We have the threat build. So obviously, like if you get threat level maximum with threats, like just pick it. You don't really have to think too much about it. But obviously, like threats are a little more unique in that sense. So Bel'Veth carry is an absolute monster. You pretty much just want Hextech Gunblade plus Last Whisper plus third item. So Titan's Resolve is probably the best one. Other options I believe we have are listed down here. No, they are not, but we'll add that in later. Pretty much anything that gives her more damage is going to be good. So like Deathblade, Giant Slayer, maybe like an RFC or something like that, Runons. And any of those will do, Guard Breaker, things like that. Edge of Night is also good on her. So you have a lot of different options there for like her third item. Main tank's going to be Rammus or Cho'Gath if they're 3-star. If not, it's going to be Zac. So it depends on how the build actually plays out. There's also like a couple of different carries you could use in the threat build. So instead of Bel'Veth, you could use something like a LeBlanc because she's also a 3-cost unit. And obviously like the Recons that we saw before, because they all use like the threat tanks up front. Next build up we have is the Yummi Reroll. So this one is a little more situational than the rest. However, if you do get it, like it's very unstoppable. Like I've had full legendary boards lose to a fully capped Yuumi 3-star board. And this doesn't just happen in my games, it happens in other people's games too. I've even seen someone running like 9 Lasercorps, which pretty much always wins, lose to the Yummi Reroll board. If they ever get like every 6 3-stars, there's not much you could do about it. It is what it is. It's just like life, you know? It's just a really good comp. The only downside of this build is if you're contested, it's rough, but it's not just contested Yuumi, it's contested super. So if there's another Draven player, the game could be a little rough. So when you play Kaisa Reroll, like the only contest you can have is if someone also plays Kaisa Reroll. But for Yuumi Reroll, they could either also play Yuumi Reroll, or they could play the Draven Reroll because they steal 3 of your main units. You could still play the comp while someone else is playing Draven, like sometimes you're forced to, but like you can't reach its full potential unless you get really lucky. So that's like the one downside. But pretty much you just want to roll at level 6 and you pretty much stay there until you hit everything 3-star except for Nyla. So you hit like Yummi, Rel, Lee Sin, Malphite 3-star. Sometimes you get the Gangplank, sometimes you don't. He's a little harder to hit. And then after you get those, level up, play a Riven at level 7, and then roll for Nyla 3. That's pretty much all you have to do for the build. And like you don't have to get Nyla 3. You could also just level up, play like random garbage instead. For augments, you want stuff like Battle Mage is probably the best one. Anything with sustain, Second Wind is good. Second Wind's just good in general. Ascension's really good. Uplink's really good. Yeah, there's a lot of things you could use. Like don't stress too much about them. Like econ augments are good too to make sure you hit everything, but only get like 1 econ augment. So like 1 trade sector or like 1 consistency. You know, you don't need like 2 econ augments. You don't want to go like trade sector and consistency, for example, because when that does happen, like your comp runs out of steam. But that's like pretty much like all you need to do. Just reroll on level 6. And yeah, that'd be uncontested. That's kind of the build there. Let's take a look at the items. You guys probably already know it's bow, 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 bow. After that, like I personally like belt. Also chain is really solid, but rod and sword are key to certain comps. So if you like going Lasercorps, get the sword. If you like going for like MF, Viego, or the AP builds, go for a rod. Tier is okay for some of the rerolls that you can get. And then like glove and cloak, just try not to get those. Like glove is still usable because you could still build Last Whisper, but it's a lot less usable than like a bow, for example. So we went over all the S tier comps. Like for the A tier, nothing else has really changed. So I do recommend checking out the previous video if you want to look into them. But I will say that like it's a lot of the rerolls, like Gangplank, Renekton reroll. Those are going to be really strong. Like the mage build, Soraka and Taliyah, like they're just a lot weaker. Like nothing's stopping you from playing them, but I guess LP loss is the only thing that could. LeBlanc reroll, pretty solid if you get a good admin. Like pretty much just what we said in the summary, it holds true. So I did take a different approach in this meta snapshot because it is like the week 2 update and it's pretty like solved. So it's just go Samira, and then if you get like a hero augment for something else, or like a perfect start for like Kaisa, or like uncontested like Gangplank or something, like sure, try and go for it. But that's gonna be it for me today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and good luck in your climbs, and hopefully I'll see you guys on my stream as well. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe, and of course smash that like button. Each like is an LP I gain before the next video.